The courtroom felt colder than it looked. Marianne adjusted the sleeve of her navy blue blouse, the one her sister said made her look dignified but not desperate. Her hands were calm in her lap, but she could feel the edges of her heart scraping against her ribs. Tight. Sharp. Familiar. She had been to court once before, decades ago, for a traffic ticket she barely remembered. But this felt different. This wasn't about a stop sign. This was about the last 10 years of her life being condensed into legal language, into filed motions and procedural rules, and the glossy, practiced smiles exchanged between people who had never shared a bed, a bank account, or a breakdown. Her ex-husband, Aaron Whitman, stood at the far end of the room in a tailored charcoal suit, greeting the bailiff like an old friend. He had that same disarming confidence he used at open houses, the handshake that lingered just long enough, the smile that said, "You can trust me, I'm the solution you've been waiting for." His salt and pepper hair, trimmed with surgical precision, gave him an air of distinguished authority. The judge, an older man with a slight southern drawl and a Yale diploma framed behind him, chuckled warmly as Aaron made some quiet remark. The two men shared a laugh that it was the same laugh Aaron used at dinner parties, the one that used to make Marianne feel like she was standing on the outside of something. Even when she was his wife, she noticed how the court clerk barely looked at her when she signed in. How Aaron's attorney, a young man in an expensive light gray suit, only offered a shallow nod when he passed her table. Marianne didn't expect sympathy. She wasn't here for that. A few rows back, a young couple whispered to each other, both in jeans and hoodies, waiting for their case to be called. Another man, handcuffed and quiet, sat next to a public defender scrolling through a notepad. There was a rhythm to this place, a choreography of patience and performance. Marianne let herself watch it all, quietly, carefully. Whitman v. Whitman, the clerk called. Aaron's attorney stood up first, then Aaron. Marianne rose a beat after. Her flats made no sound on the polished wooden floor. She could feel her heart in her throat, but her steps remained steady. "Good morning," the judge said, still half smiling from whatever Aaron had just said. "Good morning, Your Honor." Aaron responded smoothly. Marianne nodded respectfully. "Good morning." She sat at the plaintiff's table and placed her worn leather bag beside her chair. Inside was everything: the copies, the screenshots, the dates, the letters. But most importantly, her phone, silent and face down for now. Aaron's lawyer began with an opening statement, rehearsed and clean. "Your Honor, my client is a respected business owner in the community with no history of abuse or misconduct. This motion, we believe, stems not from a place of legitimate concern, but from residual emotions following a difficult but legally resolved divorce." Marianne didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She just listened. He went on. Their divorce had been finalized 2 years prior. No minor children. Assets had been split. But now she was back in court, alleging ongoing coercion and harassment. He subtly emphasized those words like they were lifted from a tabloid headline, and respectfully, "Your Honor, we believe that this courtroom should not be used as a stage for personal grievances when no legal grounds support them." When it was her turn to speak, Marianne didn't rush. She stood slowly, deliberately. Her voice, when it came, was clear, not loud, not meek. "Your Honor, I understand how this may appear. And I understand how skilled Mr. Whitman is at appearing cooperative, generous, and fair. I lived with that man for over a decade. I've seen him turn charm into currency. I've seen how he hides behind the very rules he bends in private. Today, I'm not here to recount every moment that led me to this seat. I'm here because something happened this morning that your court deserves to see." Aaron shifted in his chair. "Is that so?" the judge asked, voice still mild. "Yes," Marianne said. Then she looked at the judge directly. "But I'll wait my turn, Your Honor. I know how this goes." There was a pause. The room seemed to reset. The judge glanced at her, a flicker of something, curiosity, passing through his eyes. Aaron leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. Marianne didn't look at him. She sat back down, and waited, just like she always had. The bench seat wasn't uncomfortable, but it pressed against Marianne's spine in a way that felt surgical, like it was trying to open her up and find whatever she hadn't yet said aloud. Aaron's attorney continued speaking. Something about character witnesses. Something about no recent evidence and absence of police reports. His voice droned with the cadence of someone used to being heard, confident that tone outweighed truth. Marianne let her eyes wander for just a moment. To the jury box, empty, because this wasn't that kind of trial. To the bailiff, arms crossed, bored, shifting his weight between his feet. To the windows, tall, grid, and too clean. They let in the kind of light that made you feel exposed, like a confession waiting to happen. She had opened her bookstore 10 years ago. A small brick space just off Main Street. A dream that started with a handwritten open sign and too many hours spent rearranging poetry collections no one bought. Aaron helped her negotiate the lease. He'd even picked out The shelving. Back then, he loved saying she was the soul in their marriage, while he was the strategist. When he left, 2 years, 3 months, and 5 days ago, he kept using that word, strategy. He strategized how they told friends. He strategized how to split the house. He strategized the silence she hadn't planned to take him to court. Again. Not after the divorce. Not after she finally learned to wake up without checking her phone first to see if he'd messaged. But 6 months ago, the messages started again, first, about property taxes, misunderstandings, he claimed. Then about the bookstore lease, which, unknown to her, had a clause he'd written into the contract years ago giving him certain rights if she ever missed a payment. Then, the tone shifted. You know what I could do if I really wanted to? Let's not make this uglier than it has to be. You always knew I made things happen. Marianne kept everyone. She never responded. She archived them in a folder labeled just in case. Then, this morning, at 6:12 a.m., she received a string of messages that finally pushed her to stop waiting. One of them read, "We both know this hearing is a formality. The judge likes me. You should think carefully before making a fool of yourself in that room." Another, "Last chance. Don't do something you'll regret." He always knew how to thread charm and threat into the same sentence. And he always counted on her silence. "Miss Whitman," the judge's voice interrupted her thoughts, using the name she hadn't decided whether to reclaim. "Would you like to respond now?" She stood. "I would, Your Honor." She walked to the front with the slow gravity of someone carrying a fragile truth. She opened her bag and pulled out the clear envelope the court clerk had asked for during filing, printed screenshots, labeled and timestamped. "Before I submit these, I'd like to ask permission to display a few of them directly, if the court allows it." Aaron's lawyer shifted. "Your Honor, we object to any attempt to dramatize. They're direct messages," Marianne said, her voice calm. "Sent to me this morning. There's no dramatization. Just context." The judge considered her for a moment. His smile faded, not into hostility, but into neutrality. "Professional attention, you may proceed," he said. She unlocked her phone. Her fingers didn't shake. She tapped the album marked 6:12 a.m. and held the screen outward, stepping toward the evidence stand. The room was silent, the kind of silence that lands in your ears like pressure before a storm. No one coughed. No one shuffled papers. The judge leaned forward slightly. Aaron, for the first time that morning, turned fully toward her, and Marianne spoke, not with anger, but with precision. "This is what he wrote to me today, before we arrived here. These are not about taxes. They're not about property. They're about control. And I have many more." She didn't look at Aaron again. She didn't need to. The courtroom, which had earlier felt like a place designed to swallow her voice, now felt smaller. Tighter. Like it had leaned in to listen. The silence held, stretching like glass between two sharp edges. Marianne returned to her seat, her phone now placed gently on the table before her, screen still glowing faintly with the last message displayed, the one Aaron had typed with his usual faux-concerned urgency. "It's not too late to make this go away. You know I've always protected you." Aaron shifted in his chair again. This time, not from confidence or charm. He leaned back slightly, crossed his arms. His jaw moved once, like he was chewing on something bitter. The judge cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, suddenly aware of how closely the courtroom was watching. He reached for the printed photos Marianne had submitted and began flipping through them. 1, 2, 5. The tone changed. The room hadn't gotten louder, but it felt heavier. Even the court reporter, until now half listening, raised her eyes toward the bench. Aaron's lawyer stood, tugging once at the sleeve of his jacket. "Your Honor, I'd like to note that these communications, if authenticated, still don't amount to legal harassment. Strong language between former spouses is not uncommon. And my client, Mr. Harris," the judge interrupted, voice measured, "you'll get your turn. Sit down." The younger man obeyed, but not before casting a sidelong glance at Aaron, a glance that said this is not how today was supposed to go. Marianne watched it all without smiling. There was no satisfaction, not yet. Just a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Finally released, the judge turned his attention back to her. "Ms. Whitman, can you confirm when these messages were received?" She nodded. "This morning. Starting at 6:12 a.m., as I was getting ready to come here." "And have there been other messages like this in recent months?" "Yes," she said. "Some less aggressive. Some more subtle. All with the same intention. To intimidate, control, or threaten outcomes." Aaron finally spoke. "Your Honor, may I respond directly?" The judge looked at him for a long second before nodding. Aaron stood slowly, hands folded in front of him, the exact posture he'd used during real estate presentations, Marianne remembered. The same stance he used when he told their friends at the dinner table that Marianne had decided the bookstore was worth more than the marriage, a performance with just the right seasoning of regret. I did send those messages, Aaron began. But I need to explain the context. This has been a very difficult process for both of us. There's a lot of emotion involved. And I admit, I was frustrated this morning. I reached out in a poor moment. But I was trying to avoid unnecessary escalation. I wasn't threatening her. The judge tilted his head slightly. Aaron continued, we've been divorced for over 2 years. I've respected the agreement, never missed a payment, never violated any terms. I want to move forward. She's the one bringing us back into this courtroom. And what were you referring to, the judge asked, when you said, the judge likes me and don't do something you'll regret? Aaron paused, just a fraction too long. I meant that it would be unwise to prolong something that was already resolved. I wasn't suggesting anything improper. Marianne watched him fold himself back into that sleek, lacquered version of himself, rational, pleasant, misunderstood. The one people always believed. The judge didn't answer right away. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a folded cloth from his inner jacket pocket, not rushed, not impatient. Then, he looked at Marianne again. Do you have a record of previous messages, Ms. Whitman? From earlier months? Yes, Your Honor, she said. Printed and on the phone. I can submit both. Please do. She reached into her bag again, a stack of papers clipped neatly, organized by month. Her sister had helped her the night before, laying them all out on the kitchen table, arranging them like some painful mosaic. The clerk took them, carried them to the bench. Aaron was still standing. His face had changed. Not panic, not yet, but the edges were softening, warping under pressure. The judge read a few lines aloud, slowly. October 2nd, I know your little store isn't doing well. Just a reminder who signed the lease. November 12th, you think anyone will believe a woman like you over a man like me? December 19th, I don't want to destroy you, Marianne. But don't test me. A rustle passed through the courtroom, subtle, but real. The judge looked up. Mr. Whitman, he said evenly, you're correct that frustration between former spouses isn't uncommon. But this isn't frustration. This is a pattern. And we're no longer talking about the past, we're talking about this morning. Aaron opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat down. The balance in the room had shifted, not completely, not finally, but enough that Marianne could feel it, not a victory, but a beginning. The first inch of space between her and the shadow that used to follow her home, and for the first time since walking into that courtroom, she let herself believe something quietly radical. Maybe they'll hear me this time. Aaron's hands were folded tightly on the table, but his right thumb twitched, a barely noticeable flick against his knuckle. Marianne saw it. She used to know every one of his tells. The subtle shifts in tone. The hand gestures that came before a lie. The dramatic pauses that gave his words weight. What surprised her now wasn't that he still had them, it was how quickly she recognized them again. Like dusting off an old language she hadn't spoken in years. The judge scanned the printed messages with quiet focus, flipping pages without speaking. Every turn of paper was deliberate. The courtroom waited, holding its breath. The young couple in the back, the one in the hoodies, stopped whispering. Even the bailiff leaned slightly forward. Then the judge finally spoke. This is no longer a question of tone or intention. This is sustained behavior. Intimidation disguised as civility. Mr. Whitman, you've stated under oath that your communications were attempts to avoid escalation. Do you still stand by that? Aaron shifted. My intent wasn't to intimidate, he replied slowly. But if Ms. Whitman interpreted it that way, I regret that. That was never the goal. Marianne didn't move. Her hands rested lightly on the table, her expression neutral. The judge turned to her. Ms. Whitman, has there been any in-person contact between the two of you since the divorce? Marianne nodded once. Twice. Both times at my bookstore. Once last spring, he came in unannounced and asked to talk like adults. The second time was 2 months ago. He stood outside, didn't come in, but waited until I locked the door. Told me I was making this harder than it needed to be. I didn't report either incident. I didn't think anyone would believe it mattered. The judge nodded, his face unreadable. Aaron's attorney rose. Your Honor, with respect, we believe these claims are being exaggerated for effect. There's no formal documentation, no police reports, no witnesses. It's hearsay at best. I'm not claiming a crime was committed, Marianne said, her voice steady. I'm describing a pattern. And it's the pattern that brought me here. Not one message, not one visit, but the weight of all of it. Aaron leaned toward his lawyer again. Whispered sharply. The judge tapped his gavel gently. Let's be clear, we are no longer discussing mere annoyance or awkward post-divorce communication. We're approaching the legal threshold for coercive control, which the state recognizes as grounds for civil protection. That word, coercive, hit the room like a dropped glass. Fragile, sharp, echoing. Aaron raised a hand. Your Honor, I have no history of violence. No restraining orders. I've never laid a hand on anyone in my life. You don't have to, the judge said quietly. That's the entire point. Marianne didn't react, but she felt something shift in her chest, a small, invisible latch unlocking. The judge looked between them. At this time, I'm issuing a temporary no-contact order pending full review. All direct communication, including text, email, and third-party messages, must cease immediately. Ms. Whitman, we'll schedule a hearing for full protection consideration within the next 10 business days. Aaron's lawyer protested, but the judge raised his hand again. Motion denied. The evidence is sufficient for this interim action. Marianne let her breath escape slowly. The words didn't feel like victory, they felt like relief. Like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground holds firm beneath your feet. The bailiff approached her table, quietly confirming the logistics of the order. Her phone would be copied, the messages preserved for the official record. Aaron, meanwhile, was already flipping through papers with his attorney, his voice hushed but urgent. He wasn't smiling anymore. Marianne didn't look at him again. As she gathered her papers, the judge glanced toward her. His tone softened slightly. Ms. Whitman, thank you for your clarity today. She nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. It wasn't over. She knew that. The real hearing was still ahead, the full order, the questions, maybe even his counterclaims. But something had changed in the air around her. The quiet dismissal she expected hadn't come. The smiles Aaron counted on hadn't saved him. Outside, the sky was clouded and humid. She stepped into the weight of summer air and paused at the top of the courthouse steps. Her bookstore was only a few blocks away, and open. Her assistant, Jamie, was running it today. The idea of returning there, after this, felt surreal. She'd stand behind the counter, sell novels, recommend memoirs, explain why the poetry shelf wasn't dusty, just patient, and maybe tonight, just maybe, she'd sleep through the night. No late check-ins.no ghost messages.no performance reviews from a man who'd walked away but refused to let go. The wind lifted her hair slightly as she turned toward Main Street, shoulders still tense, but head high, and for the first time in months, Marianne allowed herself a small smile. Not because anything was finished, but because something real had finally begun. The bell above the door let out its usual chime as Marianne stepped into Redfern Books, her sanctuary of soft lamplight, second-hand paperbacks, and the quiet rhythm of routine. Jamie looked up from the counter. You okay? It was a simple question, not what happened or how did it go, just you okay? The kind of question you only ask when you're prepared to actually hear the answer. I think so, Marianne replied, setting her bag down behind the register. Jamie tilted her head. You want me to hang around a bit? Marianne glanced at the clock, 2:14 p.m. The store was quiet. One customer browsed near the fiction wall, a teenage girl with oversized headphones and a stack of worn paperbacks under her arm. I'm good, Marianne said softly. Thank you. Really? Jamie hesitated, then nodded, tapping the counter twice with her palm. Text me if it gets weird. Marianne offered a faint smile. When has it not been weird lately? When the door closed behind Jamie, the silence of the shop settled around her like a blanket, familiar, fragile, and faintly dusty. She walked slowly down the nearest aisle, her fingers brushing against spines she'd shelved 100 times. Baldwin. Didion. Lahiri. Ferrante. Names she trusted more than most people. She paused at the poetry section, the one Aaron had once called a waste of shelf space. He said no one bought poetry anymore. Said she should use that wall for something useful, like true crime or cookbooks. But she'd left it. On purpose. Marianne sat behind the register, turned the small desk fan toward her face, and unlocked her phone. The courthouse still held a copy of the messages, but she couldn't bring herself to delete them yet. Not because she wanted to reread them, but because she needed to remember what it had taken to be believed. She scrolled past them quickly and opened her email. One message stood out. Subject, hearing update. It was from Catherine Webb, her attorney. Not a friend, not someone Marianne had ever expected to hire. But steady, direct, and the only person in the last month who never once asked, "Are you sure it's that serious?" Marianne, I spoke briefly with the judge's clerk after you left. He's reviewing your full documentation ahead of the permanent order hearing. Given the tone of this morning's session, we're in a stronger position than I anticipated. Please keep a log of any further attempts by Aaron to contact you, even indirect ones. I'll reach out in a few days to prep for the next hearing. And, for what it's worth, I've seen judges ignore worse. He didn't ignore you. Catherine. Marianne stared at that last line. He didn't ignore you. So simple. So unexpected. It filled her throat with something close to grief. Or maybe relief's quieter cousin. All those years of smiling through tension. Of second-guessing herself after every joke Erin made that only she understood as a warning. Of wondering if she was just too sensitive. Too reactive. Too much. A car idled briefly in front of the store. She glanced up instinctively. Just an older man parallel parking. Still, her body tightened before her mind could explain why that was. The thing about finally calling something what it is, your body takes longer to stop bracing. By late afternoon. The store had filled with the usual hum of customers, a mother and son arguing over a graphic novel, a young man asking if she had any Vonnegut that wasn't beat to hell, an older woman gently rearranging a row of self-help books like she was trying to find something more honest between the lines. She answered their questions, rang up their purchases, offered small, practiced smiles, but underneath it all, something had changed. She felt less like someone defending herself, and more like someone building a boundary, and she knew, even if Erin didn't try to contact her again directly, the next hearing wouldn't be quiet. Men like him didn't retreat easily. He'd find an angle, a new tone, a new way to cast her as bitter, unstable, dramatic, but the moment she handed her phone to the judge, the story had stopped being his alone. Around 6 p.m., the store began to empty. A warm sunset poured across the hardwood floor. She sat again behind the counter, resting her hand on the edge of the register, watching her reflection in the storefront window, transparent but solid, there and not there. She didn't look scared anymore, she just looked like a woman learning how to take up space again. One customer remained. The girl with the headphones. She came to the counter, silent, and placed her stack of books down. Big reading weekend? Marianne asked. The girl nodded. Poetry, mostly. Marianne smiled, this time without reservation. Good choice. It started with the podcast. Jamie texted her the link mid-morning. You heard this? Marianne was shelving a new shipment of books, most of them titles she hadn't ordered but had been sent by mistake. When she saw it, she clicked. The title hit first, Reputation Under Fire, When Divorce Turns into a Weapon, a conversation with Aaron Whitman, local business leader and father of two. She read it twice, father of two? They never had kids. She hit play. Aaron's voice poured into her headphones, that familiar, easy cadence. Relaxed. Warm. The exact tone he used when closing deals or talking to neighbors over his morning coffee. I want to be clear, he said calmly. I'm not angry. I'm concerned. When people take something personal and turn it into a public accusation, especially in court, it impacts more than just reputations. It sets a dangerous precedent. The host hummed sympathetically. You're saying this was unexpected? Completely, Aaron said. We'd been divorced for years. I thought we were both moving on. I was blindsided. No warning, no attempt to talk it out, just accusations filed in court. Marianne stared blankly at the poetry shelf, her body suddenly very still. There's been a lot of talk about emotional abuse, Aaron continued. I think those words carry weight. Serious weight. And they should. But they shouldn't be used carelessly. Or strategically. Strategically, she stopped the audio. Pulled out her earbuds, her breath was tight. She walked to the back office, closed the door, and sat at her desk. The quiet hum of the shop carried faintly through the wall, the wind chimes near the entrance, the hum of conversation, the occasional thud of a book placed back too hard on a shelf. She didn't cry, she just sat there, still. She'd known this would happen, had told herself to expect it. But hearing him, so effortlessly step into the role of the reasonable one, it still landed like a gut punch. He knew how to sound calm while undermining her. Knew how to say she's unstable without saying it at all, and the worst part, most people listening wouldn't question it. A soft knock came on the office door. Jamie opened it a crack. Hey, she said gently. I didn't mean to throw that at you. I just thought you'd want to know. I did, Marianne said. Thank you. Jamie stepped inside. He's spinning it. Classic PR rinse cycle. Marianne let out a hollow laugh. He's always been good at audience work. Jamie sat across from her. You want me to respond? Or we can just ignore it. People cycle through these things fast. No, Marianne said. I don't want to be the counter-narrative. I just want the court to do its job. Jamie hesitated. You know he's not going to stop. Not until the hearing's done. Maybe not even then. Marianne looked down at her hands. I know. That evening, after closing up, she called Catherine, her attorney. I heard the podcast, Catherine said without prompting. He's calling me calculated, Marianne said flatly. He's trying to reframe the story, Catherine replied. Public sympathy, character points, soft discrediting. It's not illegal, it's just strategic. There it was again. Strategic. Marianne let that word sink in. Should I respond? She asked. No, Catherine said firmly. Not publicly. Not now. Let him talk. Let him overextend. We stay with facts. With evidence. And next week, we walk into that courtroom with a single goal, making it impossible for them to ignore the truth. Marianne nodded slowly. Okay. Also, Catherine added, he filed a request for a character affidavit to be read during the next hearing. From a former colleague of yours. Wants to paint you as overly emotional. Reactionary. Marianne closed her eyes. Who? She asked. Catherine hesitated. Jennifer Hughes. You worked together during that small business development program, yes? She ghosted me after the divorce. Took Aaron's side. Or maybe just the quieter path. Well, Catherine said, she submitted a written statement. We'll review it and prepare a response. You don't have to worry about it alone. Marianne opened her eyes. I'm not worried. Good. I'm tired. Catherine exhaled. That's fair. But you're doing well, Marianne. This isn't going away quietly, because you didn't. That night, Marianne stood in her kitchen, stirring a pot of lentil soup she didn't really want. The windows were open. Summer air drifted in. On the kitchen table, 3 piles of documents, color-coded tabs sticking out like sharp little tongues. On her phone, dozens of unread messages. A few were kind, people from the neighborhood who'd heard murmurs and wanted her to know they believed in her strength. But some were vague. Others weren't vague at all. Why go public if you just want peace? Funny how victims always find microphones. You were always a little too intense for him. She muted the notifications. She turned off the phone. Outside, the wind picked up. The branches tapped against the window like a memory trying to get in. She poured herself a small bowl of soup, sat at the table, and pulled a blank notepad toward her. At the top, she wrote. Hearing prep. What I want them to understand. She stared at the line for a long time, then she started writing, not legal arguments, not accusations, just truth. Marianne hadn't touched the soup. The notepad lay open on the kitchen table, her handwriting slow and careful, drifting diagonally across the page. No bullet points. No outline. Just sentences, unfinished, unrehearsed. I never thought I would be the kind of woman who stayed quiet for so long. She paused, pencil in hand. The words looked foreign. Like someone else had written them. The truth was, it hadn't happened all at once. Aaron never raised a hand. He didn't scream. He never called her names that could be quoted in court. He didn't do the things that made it into the police reports or headlines. He simply rearranged her. Over time, the first time she felt herself shrink was in their 3rd year of marriage. She'd hosted a poetry reading at the bookstore, an event that drew maybe 20 people and sold less than $50 in books. But the laughter and the wine and the soft hum of language had made her feel full in a way she couldn't explain. Afterward, at home, Aaron had smiled and said, "It's cute that you're trying to make it a real business." She laughed. Tried to take it as a joke. But later that night, when she checked their shared budget and saw that he'd reclassified the store as a personal expense, she didn't laugh. She didn't even bring it up. That was how it started, not with a blow with a reclassification. She added to the notepad, "It's hard to explain the slow kind of silence, the one you talk yourself into." He didn't like how she dressed for author events. Said it made her look too intense or like someone trying to prove something. He didn't like when she corrected him in front of friends. Said it embarrassed him. He didn't like when she talked too much at dinner parties. Said it made people uncomfortable. So she adjusted. She softened. She cut her sentences in half before they finished forming. By the 5th year of marriage, she had stopped speaking in meetings about the store altogether, letting Aaron handle the calls with the landlord, the accountant, even the part-time staff. He's just better at the details, she'd told herself. By the 7th year, she no longer opened their bank statements. By the 10th, she was waiting for permission to buy a new light fixture for the reading corner. Now, sitting at the same kitchen table where she used to rehearse excuses, she let the pencil touch paper again. It wasn't one moment. It was 1,000 small ones. And by the time I noticed, I couldn't remember what my own voice sounded like. The next morning, Catherine sent a text, "Quick check-in at noon?" Marianne agreed. They met at a coffee shop near the courthouse, a quiet place with white tile floors and high ceilings. Catherine had brought a folder, but didn't open it right away. "You look steadier," she said. "I feel clearer." Catherine nodded. "That's good. Because Aaron's lawyer is leaning hard into the narrative that this is about resentment. That you're bitter, jealous, angry he's moved on." Marianne didn't flinch. "Has he?" Catherine tilted her head. "Moved on?" "Yeah. Is he seeing someone?" "He never told me, but I wouldn't be surprised if he had someone lined up the whole time." Catherine hesitated. "There's a woman he's been publicly close with. She'll likely be at the hearing. His attorney might even reference her indirectly, as a sign of his stability." Marianne almost laughed. Stability. She remembered a night 3 years ago when Aaron had shown up at the store after hours, drunk but composed, standing in the back doorway and telling her, "You were never supposed to outgrow me." She'd never told anyone that, not even her sister. Catherine finally opened the folder and handed over a copy of Jennifer Hughes' affidavit. It was 2 pages. Carefully worded. Written with the soft language of plausible deniability. Marianne was passionate about her work, but often overwhelmed. She could be emotional during planning sessions and occasionally read more hostility into feedback than was intended. Marianne read it twice. "She makes it sound like I was paranoid." Catherine nodded. "That's the subtext. But it's not damning. Just soft character shading. I can question it if needed." Marianne folded the paper. "No. Let it stand." Catherine looked at her. "You sure? She's doing what people do when they're uncomfortable. She's not my enemy. She's just trying not to get involved." "Most people do." "I know," Marianne said. "That's what makes speaking out feel like a betrayal. Because everyone's playing the quiet game, and you're the one ruining it." Catherine said nothing for a while. Then, "You're not ruining it. You're just changing the rules." That night, Marianne stayed late at the bookstore. She stood near the front window, looking out at Main Street. A car passed slowly, headlights brushing across her face. She didn't move. Somewhere in the store, the wind pushed gently against the old windows, making the frames groan. She went to the poetry shelf and picked up a worn copy of The Dream of A Common Language by Adrienne Rich, the one Aaron had once mockingly referred to as your feminist gospel. She held it for a moment, then opened to a dog-eared page. "Until we learn to name our pain in our own words, someone else will always do it for us." The courthouse lobby buzzed with low voices and hard-soled shoes on polished floors. A young man was crying quietly in the corner, pressing a folded piece of paper into his palm like it was the only thing holding him together. A woman in a navy suit walked past, muttering about subpoenas into a Bluetooth headset. The air tasted like nerves. Marianne stood near the metal detector, her bag already scanned, her body still. She held her phone and a small stack of documents, nothing extra. Catherine waited beside her, flipping through final notes, calm but alert. "You ready?" Catherine asked. Marianne nodded once. "Yes." "Stay steady. Don't let him pull you into his tempo." "I won't." The bailiff called out, "Whitman versus Whitman. Hearing 10 a.m., courtroom 3B. They walked in. It was the same room as before, but it felt different now. Tighter. Full. Aaron was already there, seated neatly beside his attorney in a navy pinstripe suit and soft gray tie. His face unreadable, posture perfect. There was someone sitting behind him, a woman in a beige dress, younger, composed, legs crossed carefully. The new girlfriend, probably. Marianne didn't look twice. A few other spectators had come in, people from the community, reporters, maybe. She recognized one woman who ran a popular parenting blog. Another who'd bought a rare cookbook from the store years ago. Small town. Attention was always gentle until it wasn't. The judge entered. The bailiff called order. The courtroom stood, then Saturday the hearing began. Aaron's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, thank you. Today we intend to demonstrate that Ms. Whitman's claims, while emotionally compelling, lack legal foundation. What we're witnessing here is not abuse, but conflict, the kind that follows many divorces. It's unfortunate, but not uncommon. We will show that Mr. Whitman made efforts to maintain civility, and that this motion is a reactive attempt to control the narrative outside of court." He continued, "Yes, he sent messages. But none rose to the level of threat. None demanded action. And none were followed by conduct that endangered or harassed Ms. Whitman in any measurable way. We also have a character affidavit to present, to demonstrate Ms. Whitman's history of misreading intent and responding with disproportionate emotion." Marianne felt the word disproportionate move through her like cold air. She didn't blink. Then Catherine rose. "Your Honor, what we have here is not a misunderstanding between ex-spouses. It's a pattern of coercive behavior, consistent, strategic, and targeted. Mr. Whitman used his position, his knowledge of Ms. Whitman's vulnerabilities, and the shared history of their marriage to continue controlling her well after their legal separation." Catherine placed the documents gently on the evidence table. "These are not stray messages. They are calculated communications with recurring language, reminders of financial power, veiled threats, and warnings designed to isolate, undermine, and intimidate. We will also be presenting testimony from Ms. Whitman, and a log of incidents that, when taken together, establish the clear need for ongoing protection." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marianne took the stand. The bailiff asked her to raise her right hand. She did. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." She sat. The microphone was close enough to catch every breath, but not so close that it felt invasive. Catherine stepped up beside her. Ms. Whitman, can you describe the messages you received from your ex-husband on the morning of the previous hearing? Marianne's voice was steady. They came early. Before 6:30 a.m. He told me I was making a mistake. That I'd regret it. That the judge liked him. That it wasn't too late to stop. Was that the first time he sent messages of that kind? No, she said. They started slowly after the divorce. At first about money, or the store. Then more personal. He knew what phrases would make me hesitate. What would sound small to others, but heavy to me. And how did you feel when you read them? Marianne looked up. Cornered. Not terrified. Just exhausted. Like I had to choose between being quiet and being treated like a problem. And why did you choose to come forward now? Because it wasn't stopping, she said. And because I finally understood that just because something isn't loud doesn't mean it's not dangerous. Catherine nodded. Thank you. Aaron's lawyer stood. Ms. Whitman, would you say you were prone to reading into things? No, you never overreacted during your marriage. I reacted, she said. Not always calmly. But not without reason. The lawyer smiled faintly. You'd agree your relationship was emotionally complex? Most long-term relationships are. He held up a page. In this message, Mr. Whitman says, I don't want to destroy you, but don't test me. Isn't it possible that was metaphorical? Expressing frustration, not threat. It was a sentence written by a man who knows how to walk the edge of legal lines, Marianne replied. And who counts on being the only one in the room who sounds reasonable. There was a beat of silence. Thank you, he said tightly, and returned to his seat. The judge called a recess. 10 minutes, Marianne stepped into the hallway. The air was dry. Her throat ached. Catherine joined her, eyes scanning the small cluster of people now milling just outside the courtroom. You did exactly what you needed to, she said. Does it matter? Marianne asked. What I said? Catherine looked at her. Yes, she said. It does. You didn't flinch. That matters. Back inside, the judge called court back into session. The affidavit was read. Jennifer Hughes's words echoed like wallpaper, soft, formal, distant. Marianne didn't react. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench. I'll take this matter under advisement. A decision will be issued within the week. Until then, the no-contact order remains in effect. The gavel fell. Everyone stood. Aaron turned to leave. For a moment, his eyes caught hers, not with rage, not with fear, but with something like surprise. As if he'd really believed, down to the last minute, that she would fold. That she would apologize. That she would come undone just enough for him to reclaim the story. She didn't. She turned away. The decision didn't come the next day. Or the one after that. For 3 full business days, Marianne lived inside a silence that felt both punishing and strangely clarifying. She had said everything she could. She had offered the texts, the testimony, the restraint. Now the process was out of her hands, and Aaron? He'd vanished from view. No more podcasts, no new messages, not even a whisper from anyone mutual. That wasn't like him. Which made her wonder what he was planning, or if the performance had simply shifted off stage. On Wednesday afternoon, Marianne sat behind the counter at Redfern Books, pretending to read while the summer heat turned the window panes into sheets of soft light. A customer walked in, a woman in her late 50s, unfamiliar. She wore a floral blouse and carried a small leather tote. Marianne greeted her with a polite nod. The woman wandered for a few minutes, picked up a copy of The Year of Magical Thinking, then approached the counter. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said quietly, placing the book down, but I wanted to tell you something. Marianne looked up, waiting. The woman hesitated, then continued. I was in the courtroom on Monday, she said. I came to support a friend in a different case, but I sat through yours. I just wanted you to know I saw what happened. And I believed you. Marianne blinked. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. Thank you, she said softly. That means a lot. The woman nodded, smiled gently, and left. It was a small moment, no headlines, no grand declaration. But it stayed with Marianne the rest of the day. Not because it changed anything legally, but because it reminded her she wasn't invisible. That evening, she met her sister Lila for dinner. They sat on the back patio of a small cafe, cicadas humming, wine sweating in glasses between them. You didn't tell me there were reporters in the courtroom, Lila said. I didn't know there would be. There's a blog post going around. Not naming names, but it's definitely about you. Marianne sighed. Let me guess. It's about how dangerous it is to let personal drama into the courtroom. Something like that. Classic. Lila reached across the table and touched Marianne's wrist. You did the right thing. I know. Even if you don't win, I know, Marianne said again. I still did the right thing. But it wasn't that simple. She wanted the protection order. She wanted the legal recognition of what had happened. Not because she needed the system to validate her pain, but because she needed Aaron to understand there were limits he couldn't rewrite. She didn't want a line drawn in sympathy, she wanted a line drawn in law. The next morning, she woke before her alarm, a habit from the weeks when Aaron's messages had started arriving early, always between 6 and 7, always timed to catch her off guard. She made coffee, then sat in her robe at the kitchen table. The sun was just starting to reach over the rooftops. Her phone was silent. She opened her email, nothing. She opened the courthouse portal where the docket updates appeared, still nothing. She closed the browser. She stared at the wall. She felt hollow, but not fragile. Like a cup that had been emptied. On purpose. The thing about speaking the truth, once it's out, you realize how many years you spent holding your breath just to keep it in. Now she was breathing again. Slowly. Not always easily. But fully. That afternoon, Jamie pulled her aside at the store. "There's something you should see," she said, handing Marianne her phone. It was a Facebook post, anonymous, but local. A popular neighborhood page. The caption read, "Today, I listened to a woman calmly, clearly, and courageously describe a pattern of psychological control that most people still don't understand. I watched her ex-husband call her emotional. I watched her stay composed. I watched a system hesitate. And I'm still thinking about how often women are forced to prove harm while remaining likable. She did it anyway. She shouldn't have had to." Marianne read it twice, then again. She handed the phone back. "Was that you?" she asked quietly. Jamie shook her head. "Nope. Someone else who saw what I saw." Marianne nodded. The store phone rang. She answered it. Redfern Books. A man's voice. Middle-aged. "Zitan, I don't usually call places like this. But my wife told me to. She said I should come in. That I need to read more women writers. She said your store might help." Marianne smiled. "We have a whole shelf for that," she said. "Come by any time." That night, she didn't check the docket. She didn't refresh her email. She lit a candle, opened a book of essays, and let herself read for pleasure. The outcome hadn't come yet, but something in her had already settled, not resolved, but rooted. The email came at 8:12 a.m. on a Thursday. Marianne was unlocking the front door of Redfern Books when the notification buzzed on her phone. The courthouse system. Decision filed. Order attached. She paused, keys still in the lock, her breath caught halfway between inhale and release. The street was quiet. One runner passed by, headphones in, eyes fixed straight ahead. She stepped inside, closed the door behind her, and sat at the window table. The one where the morning sun always spilled across the floorboards like warm silk. She opened the email. Whitman vs. Whitman, Civil Protection Order Decision. The court finds sufficient evidence of coercive communication and sustained post-divorce harassment. A 1-year no-contact order is hereby granted. This includes direct, indirect, electronic, and third-party contact. Violations will result in immediate legal consequence. She read it again and again, not because she didn't believe it, but because part of her still didn't know what it meant to win. She exhaled, not a triumphant exhale. Not cinematic. Just real. A quiet surrender of weight. Catherine called 20 minutes later. "I saw it," Marianne said before she could speak. "You okay?" "I think so." "You did it, Marianne." There was a long pause. "Yeah," she said finally. "But it doesn't feel like celebration." "It won't. Not right away. Protection doesn't undo what happened, it just makes space for what happens next." What happened next came in waves. That afternoon, Jamie baked scones and left a tray in the staff break room with a note that read, "To not being quiet anymore." Marianne cried in the back office. Just for a minute. That evening, her sister called. "Do you want wine? Or sleep? Or both?" They chose both. Aaron did not contact her, not directly, but that weekend, a new article appeared online, penned by someone Marianne had once considered a friend. Neutral in tone, but unmistakably defensive. In posture. When do reputations stop being protected? And when do personal narratives become legal weapons? There were no names. But anyone in town who'd been watching knew exactly who it was about. Marianne didn't respond. She didn't even finish reading it. She'd already said what she needed to say. In the language of receipts. In the tone of calm defiance. In the courtroom, under oath, with the judge leaning in and the crowd trying not to blink. Let them write their articles. She had the ruling, she had the silence, and for the first time in years, it wasn't the kind that felt like disappearing. A week later, a young woman came into the store. She looked about 20. Nervous, with her keys jingling in her hand and her eyes darting toward the floor-to-ceiling poetry wall. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Do you have any books on?" "I don't know, starting over." Marianne smiled gently. "Yeah," she said. "I've got a few." She walked her over to a shelf near the back. Memoir. Fiction. Collections of essays. Some titles Marianne had clung to during long nights of second-guessing herself. Others she hadn't been able to read until recently. As the girl flipped through one of them, she asked, "Did someone recommend this place?" The girl hesitated, then said, "Sort of. Someone told me you'd understand." Marianne nodded. "I think I do." That night, she closed the store just past 6 p.m., the windows glowing with late summer light. She stood by the door for a long moment before switching off the sign. The street was empty. The sky softening. She wasn't healed, she wasn't untouchable, but she wasn't afraid anymore, and that, in itself, felt like a kind of justice. The first time she saw Aaron after the ruling, he didn't see her. It was 2 weeks later. A fundraiser at the local library, the kind of event they used to attend together, where the wine was cheap and the compliments practiced. Marianne hadn't planned to go. But the invitation had come from the new director, who'd written a handwritten note thanking her for her recent donation and asking her to consider attending. So she did. She wore black. Not as a statement, just because it made her feel still. He was across the room, near the refreshments table, standing with 2 men she vaguely recognized from the Chamber of Commerce. The new girlfriend wasn't with him. Not tonight. He looked the same, pressed shirt. Casual authority. Laughing too easily. He didn't see her, and she didn't walk toward him. But the air in the room changed anyway, subtle, like a pressure drop. A few people shifted their weight when she walked by. One woman offered her a half smile and looked away too quickly. Another, a retired English teacher named Nancy, touched her arm and whispered, "Glad you're here." Marianne nodded. It was easier than saying, "I almost didn't come because I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable." It was easier than saying, "I know I make people uncomfortable now." The next day, a letter arrived at the bookstore. No. Return address, typed. Folded 3 times. "We all have regrets. But some of us learn to carry them with grace. I hope one day you will too." No signature. No direct threat, just a whisper in disguise. Catherine had warned her this might happen. Not all violations will be obvious. Some men don't break the rules, they bend the light around them. Marianne didn't report the letter. She scanned it into her files and slid the original into a drawer labeled documentation. Then she unlocked the front door and opened the store for business. That weekend, a woman she hadn't seen in nearly a year walked through the door to Melissa Callahan, a former customer, and one of Aaron's real estate clients. Marianne remembered her as overly friendly, all compliments and curated grief, the kind of person who kept a tidy sadness for show. She smiled tightly. "Hey, Marianne. Thought I'd stop in." Marianne nodded. "Welcome." Melissa hovered. "By the memoirs, I've been following everything," she said finally, as if admitting to reading a banned book. "It's been a lot, huh?" Marianne met her gaze. "It has. I wanted to say I hope you're okay." "I am." Melissa hesitated. "You know, Aaron's not perfect. But I think he's just lost. And when people feel powerless, they act out. I'm not excusing it. Just trying to see the full picture." Marianne didn't flinch. "That's nice," she said. "But the full picture already got painted. And hung in court." Melissa blinked. "I didn't mean to offend." "You didn't," Marianne said. "But you're not helping, either." Melissa tucked her hair behind her ear, glanced down, and left without buying anything. That night, Marianne took the long way home. She drove past the neighborhood where she and Aaron had lived for 12 years, past the old craftsman house with its white porch swing and flower beds she'd planted with trembling hands during one of their quietest years. The new owners had painted the shutters green. A tricycle sat on the front lawn. She didn't feel pain, she didn't feel nostalgia, just a distant echo of a woman she used to be, trying to make silence look like peace. When she got home, she sat at her desk and opened a fresh page in her journal. At the top, she wrote, "Things I am no longer apologizing for," and beneath it, "For being angry. For naming what was done to me. For not making it easy to forget. For making some people uncomfortable. For taking up space after surviving it." She paused. Tapped her pen against the wood. Then added, "For not speaking sooner. And for finally speaking now." On Sunday afternoon, 2 teenage girls came into the bookstore. One of them clutched a printed screenshot of a poetry quote she'd seen on social media. The other carried a tiny notebook full of scribbled lines. "We're starting a writing group," one of them said. "Just us, for now. But maybe more later. We wanted to know if we could use that little table in the back sometimes." Marianne smiled. "You can use the whole back corner. Just don't be quiet about it." They laughed and settled in. She brought them tea later. When the store was empty again, she looked at the table where the girls sat, notebooks open, eyes bright, already arguing over word choice, and she realized what she'd built, not just a business, but a place where voices didn't have to shrink. Marianne sat at the back of the bookstore on a rainy Thursday morning, watching the sky drip slowly down the windowpanes like time itself was exhaling. The place smelled like old paper and cinnamon tea. The kind of weather that made people linger to the Writing group had taken over the poetry corner again, 4 teenagers now, their laughter bouncing between the shelves, high and half-whispered. One of them had scrawled a quote on the small chalkboard in the corner, "Say it, even if your voice shakes." Unknown. Marianne didn't correct the attribution, let it be anonymous. Let it belong to everyone. It had been nearly a month since the ruling. The legal protection stood. Aaron hadn't made contact. Not directly. Not legally, but people still found ways to test her shape, little nudges, phrased as kindness, cloaked in concern. Was it really that serious? Have you two spoken at all? Do you think maybe things got a little exaggerated? She no longer justified, she no longer explained, she simply said, that chapter's closed.